Sunday, 1964, with the aim of promoting dialogue with persons of other religions, in line with the spirit of the Second Vatican Council, especially its declaration Noster Aetate. The PCID is composed of about 30 members and some 50 counselors from across the world from various backgrounds and expertise, serving as consultants, specialists in religious studies, or who are engaged in the field of dialogue. Dr. John Borelli is a historian of religions and theologian. He is the special assistant for Catholic identity and dialogue to President John DeJoy of Georgetown University. He has been at Georgetown University since 2004, where he teaches, manages conferences and events, coordinates dialogues, facilitates workshops, and promotes university relations with offices and institutes of the Vatican. He received a doctorate in History of Religions and Theology in 1976 from Fordham University. He has served as coordinator for interreligious dialogue and relations for the Jesuit Conference of Canada and the United States since 2004. Prior to these appointments, Dr. Borelli served 16 years as Associate Director to the Secretariat for Ecumenical and Interreligious Affairs at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Staffing the Bishops' Subcommittee on Interreligious Dialogue, he managed 3 ongoing dialogues with Muslims, one with Buddhists, one with Hindus, and other interreligious projects. He also staffed the official ongoing ecumenical dialogues with Orthodox Christians and with Anglicans. For 1 year, he served as the interim director of the Secretariat. He was president of the National Ecumenical Officers Association for 3 years. Dr. Borelli was a consultor to the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue in the Vatican for 17 years. John is one of those rare people today who have a near complete corporate memory of the ecumenical and interreligious movements over the past 50 years. So we welcome you, John, to be with us today. And now we will receive Monsignor Indunil's keynote address.
Dear friends, it is a great honor for me to deliver the keynote address at this National Workshop of Christian Unity on Pope Francis and the Dialogue of Human Fraternity. I would like first of all to extend my sincere gratitude to the organizers for inviting me to address you in my capacity as Secretary of the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue. On behalf of the PCID, I would like to thank you all for your friendship and collaboration with our office. The context in which we meet. This year marks the 30th anniversary of the offensive dubbed Operation Desert Storm by the USA forces against the annexation of Kuwait by Iraq. 2021 also marks 20 years since the terrorist attacks that took place in the USA on September 11, 2001. The Second Gulf War, the 9/11 attacks, and their consequences introduced a plethora of local, regional, and global issues which sadly linger until today. We also meet virtually because of the COVID-19 pandemic has restricted our mobility and has inflicted untold suffering on all. The document Serving a Wounded World in Interreligious Solidarity, a Christian call to reflection and action during COVID-19 and beyond, jointly published by the PCID and the World Council of Churches, notes, I quote, "The parable of the Good Samaritan challenges Christians to think about how to live in a world wounded by the COVID-19 pandemic and by the scourge of religious intolerance, discrimination, racism, economic and ecological injustice, and many other sins." End of the quote. We can also mention here social movements dedicated to fighting systemic racism and inequality and promoting police reform, as well as the recent increase in violence and intimidation against people of East Asian descent in the USA. As we reflect on how our joint efforts as believers can serve others and alleviate suffering, it is important to acknowledge the changing religious landscape in the USA. According to the Pew Research Center, between 2007 and 2014, the Christian share of the population fell from 78.4% to 70.6%, driven mainly by decline among Protestants and Catholics. This decline continues at a rapid pace. In Pew Research Center telephone surveys conducted in 2018 and 2019, 65% of Americans adults describe themselves as Christian, down 12 percentage points over the past decade. Meanwhile, the religiously unaffiliated share of the population, consisting of people who describe their religious identity as atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular, now stands at 26%, up from 17% in 2009. Along with rapid secularization, we can also observe a gradual emergence of a multi-religious society. The non-Christian faiths, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, other world religions and other faiths have increased from 4.7% to 5.9%. Moreover, heading into the 2020 election season and beyond, an intensifying polarization in politics was revealed. A time of testing of democratic institutions is underway. To these social circumstances, we can also add issues such as immigration, for example, border security and undocumented immigration, economic insecurity and humanitarian concerns, environment and climate change, ethical problems, healthcare, hunger and food insecurity. This is the context in which we meet as Christians to reflect on our mission today. These changes in context also changes the understanding of mission profoundly. We are confident that the work of God continues, that the Holy Spirit continues to guide the Church, and love of Christ throughout your country is not extinguished. Dear friends, a time of crisis is also a time of intensification of faith. Your work of ecumenism and interreligious dialogue makes you well suited to navigate these complex times of polarization, conflict, and suffering on various levels. In this respect, the words of Pope Paul VI 1964 encyclical letter Ecclesiam Suam are still relevant. I quote, "The Church must enter into dialogue with the world it lives. It has something to say, a message to give, a communication to make." End quote. Moreover, God's very nature is dialogical. Holy Mystery, Father, Son, Word, and Spirit are in eternal relationship, communion, and dialogue, and the mission of the Trinity is to invite humanity to communion. Dialogue and mission says, I quote, "Dialogue is the norm and necessary manner of every form of Christian mission." End quote. Accordingly, mission is an act of dialogue which has a triple task to fulfill. First, a prophetic, the enunciation of God's word as well as the denunciation of systemic injustice that injures human dignity. Second, mission as dialogue is also healing. Sin and evil wound all human persons as well as nature. Violence and hatred are signs of woundedness. Revenge resolves nothing. Therefore, all are in need of healing, the victim, the perpetrator, and our common home. Third, mission as dialogue is also fraternal, breaking down the walls of separation of the us and them and fostering true brotherhood and sisterhood among people and safeguarding creation. This requires creating a new culture, a culture of encounter, supplanting the sectarian impulse, a sense of superiority and demonization. We also meet in an ecumenical context, the National Workshop of Christian Unity. During the ecumenical pilgrimage of Pope Francis to Geneva in 2018, for the 70th anniversary of the founding of the World Council of Churches, he noted, I quote, "Let us see what we can do concretely. So let us ask ourselves what we can do together. In a particular form of service is possible. Why not plan and carry it out together, and thus start to experience a more intense fraternity in the exercise of concrete charity." End quote. So we are also here to find out what we can do together or to renew our ecumenical commitment to a common mission, the ecumenism of mercy, healing, humanity filled with conflict, injustice, pain, as well as the earth. The document Christ's Love moves the world to reconciliation and unity, a reflection on the theme of the 11th Assembly of the World Council of Churches, 2022, notes, I quote, in the times in which we now live, we will ask of one another, how does a church in whom the love of Christ is pleased to dwell, organize, speak, and act in this season? And how in this moment shall we share together in God's mission of love to the world? End quote. In an attempt to answer these questions in my presentation, I will be focusing on the document Human Fraternity for World Peace and Living Together and Pope Francis's encyclical letter Fratelli Tutti. These documents remind us how important it is for us to become more and more beacons of hope through a triple mission, which is prophetic, healing, and fraternal, to contribute to the formation of a culture of compassion and encounter both in the USA and in other parts of the world. Therefore, let us study these triple tasks one by one: prophetic, healing, and fraternal. First, prophetic dialogue. Ellen F. David, in Biblical Prophecy, Perspectives for Christian Theology, Discipleship, and Ministry, set forth 5 essential elements of the prophetic traditions of the Bible. They are, first, the radical concreteness of prophetic expression, which both engages hearers in particular contexts and make vivid God's engagement with the world. Second, the prophetic demand for moral, economic, and religious integrity in human communities, Israel or the Church, and the recognition that human integrity in these several dimensions is fundamentally related. Third, prophetic participation in the suffering of the vulnerable within the created order and the social order, and prophetic witnessing to the suffering of God. Fourth, the prophets are the trusted friends of God, entrusted with a ministry of protest, prayer, healing, and reconciliation. Fifth, prophetic witness to Israel's God, which is potentially a witness of reconciliation. Stephen Bevans and Roger Schroeder, in Prophetic Dialogue, Reflections on Christian Mission Today, identify 4 characteristics of mission as prophecy. First, speaking forth without words or witness, always listening, always open, always learning from the peoples among whom it works. The Church witnesses to the truth, the joy, the life-giving power of the gospel. Second, speaking forth with words, proclamation. Christians in mission prophesy the future, God's future. Like Jesus, they explain to one another and to the world, if asked, what the future of the world will be under God's loving providence. Third, speaking against without words, being a contrast community. Christian life goes against the grain. It is not anti-cultural, because a faith rooted in the doctrine of the Incarnation loves the created world, loves people, and recognizes the deep goodness of human culture. Living the values of the reign of God as Jesus articulated them in the Sermon on the Mount. Fourth, speaking against in words, speaking truth to power. In accomplishing their prophetic mission, Christians speak out against any form of injustice, against any form of globalization of indifference and the culture of death. A prime example of prophetic mission that embodies these challenging elements is the document Human Fraternity for World Peace and Living Together. On February 4, 2019, Pope Francis and Grand Imam Ahmad al-Tayyib, after extensive prayer, discussion and collaboration, came together to sign this document. Their meeting coincided with the 800th anniversary of the meeting of St. Francis with the Sultan al-Malik al-Kamil in Egypt in the midst of the crusade in 1219. This document is prophetic because in place of an apparent clash of civilization, it fosters a culture of encounter. In place of tribalism, it promotes fraternity. It begins with the theological affirmation, I quote, "Faith leads a believer to see in the other a brother or sister to be supported and loved. Through faith in God, who has created the universe, creatures and all human beings, equal on account of His mercy, believers are called to express this human fraternity by safeguarding creation and the entire universe and supporting all persons, especially the poorest and those most in need." End of quotation. It is clear that here the text refers to the creation story. Humanity descends from one man. With human failure, sin enters into human existence, distorting relationships with God, with oneself, among human persons, and with nature. Cain's killing of Abel manifests rivalry and violence among one's own kin. The breakdown of fraternity and the consequent violence, verbal, physical, and psychological, continue to this day. We Christians believe that Jesus Christ restored fraternity to all people from the relationship of sonship, and He has with the Father as a new way of relating to God in Jesus Christ, that is, as children of the Father. The document on human fraternity pays attention to the joys, sorrows, and problems of our contemporary world. On one hand, it acclaims progress in scientific, technical, and therapeutic fields, as well as the digital era, the mass media, and communications. On the other hand, it exposes today's social ills, poverty, conflict, and suffering as a consequence of the arms race, social injustice, corruption, inequality, moral decline, terrorism, discrimination, extremism, and many other causes. Nevertheless, in this hour of darkness, the document brings a beacon of hope for all humanity by inviting, I quote, all persons who have faith in God and faith in human fraternity to unite and work together so that it may serve as a guide for future generations to advance a culture of mutual respect in the awareness of great divine grace that makes all human beings brothers and sisters in God. Likewise, the encyclical Fratelli Tutti also invites us to place the human person at the center of all political, social, and economic activity. The prophetic voice of the document on human fraternity clearly appears in its message when it identifies the evils that destroy fraternity and invites all to restore universal values. The document speaks like Old Testament prophets or like John the Baptist. First, in the name of God who has created all human beings equal in rights, duties, and dignity, and who has called them to live together as brothers and sisters. Second, in the name of innocent human life that God has forbidden to kill. Third, in the name of the poor, the destitute, the marginalized, and those most in need. Fourth, in the name of orphans, widows, refugees, and those exiled from their homes and their countries. Fifth, in the name of all victims of wars, persecution, and injustice. Sixth, in the name of the weak, those who live in fear, prisoners of war, those tortured in any part of the world without distinction. Seventh, in the name of peoples who have lost their security, peace, and the possibility of living together, becoming victims of destruction, calamity, and war. Seventh, in the name of human fraternity that embraces all human beings, unites them, and renders them equal. Ninth, in the name of this fraternity torn apart by policies of extremism and division. Tenth, in the name of freedom that God has given to all human beings, creating them free and distinguishing them by this gift. 11th, in the name of justice and mercy, the foundations of prosperity and the cornerstones of faith. 11th, in the name of all persons of goodwill in every part of the world. 12th, in the name of God, declared the adoption of a culture of dialogue as the path, mutual cooperation as the code of conduct, reciprocal understanding as the method and standard. The biblical prophets preach repentance and return to God. In the same manner, we can say that the document on human fraternity invites all believers, indeed all non-believers, and all people of goodwill to a serious soul-searching on human fraternity and living together. Fratelli Tutti also speak of a dream of the rebirth of a universal fraternity, universal aspiration to fraternity. Second point, healing. The mission of dialogue is also a healing mission. The world is replete with stories of wounded humanity and nature. Fratelli Tutti notes that certain trends in the world hinder and shatter the dream of developing universal fraternity. They are a myopic and aggressive nationalism, new forms of cultural colonialism, a throwaway world, lack of respect for universal human rights, conflicts and fears, globalization and progress without a shared roadmap, pandemics and other calamities, an absence of human dignity on the borders, the illusion of communication, and forms of subjection and of self-contempt. Therefore, in many parts of the world, there is a need for paths of peace to heal open wounds. It entails breaking the vicious cycle. Violence leads to more violence. Yet sadly, some believe that reconciliation is a sign of weakness, incapable of truly serious dialogue. They are obsessed with taking revenge and destroying the other. For some, the goal of developing the entire human family nowadays sounds like madness. Fratelli Tutti, number 16. Besides, open wounds that were never cured, the offense that were never forgiven needs to be extinguished before it turns into a great blaze. Fratelli Tutti, 243. Forgiveness and healing are central themes in Christianity and in other religions. Repairing fractured relationships ought to involve the active participation of victims, offenders, and members of the community. There is an affinity between justice and forgiveness. Accordingly, there is no peace without justice, no justice without forgiveness. Daniel Philpott mentions 6 dimensions of political injustice or woundedness. First, the violation of victims' basic rights. Second, the assault on human dignity which harm the very person. Death, permanent injury from torture, humiliation, loss of livelihood, the defilement of one's race, ethnicity, religion, nationality or gender, sexual violation, subordination of one's community, the taking of one's land. Third, the victim's ignorance of the source and circumstances of the political injustices that harm them. Fourth, a lack of acknowledgement of the victim's suffering on the part of the members of the community, either through ignorance or indifference. Fifth, the stand-in victory of the perpetrator's political injustice. This injustice leaves behind not only material, psychological, and spiritual harm, but also the unchallenged triumph of the message of disregard for the victim's dignity. 6. A political injustice that not only wounds its victims but can also recoil back to wound the perpetrator. The evil that injures the soul of the wrongdoer is often manifested in severe psychological damage. To heal these 6 wounds of political injustices and others, we need restorative practices by building institutions dedicated to healing. Fratelli Tutti states that there is an architecture and art of peace, 231, that demands the commitment of everyone and challenges us to work tirelessly. In a similar way, on the basis of religious and moral responsibility, the document on human fraternity calls upon all the architects of international policy and world economy, intellectuals, religious figures, artists, and men and women of culture to intervene to stop wars, environmental decay, and moral and cultural decline, and to rediscover the values of peace, justice, beauty, and human identity. If the world is sick, what are the symptoms of its maladies? The document on human fraternity notes that among the most important causes of the crisis of modern world are a desensitized human conscience. There exists both a moral deterioration that influences international action and a weakening of spiritual values and responsibility. It further highlights that all these elements contribute to, I quote, a general feeling of frustration, isolation, and desperation, leading many to fall either into vortex of atheistic, agnostic, or religious extremism, or into blind and fanatic extremism, which ultimately encourage forms of dependency and individual or collective self-destruction. End quote. This document also emphasizes the importance of the role of religions in healing the world as follows. First, a firm conviction that authentic teachings of religions invite us to remain rooted in the values of peace, to defend the values of mutual understanding, human fraternity, and harmonious coexistence. Second, freedom is a right of every person. Each individual enjoys the freedom of belief, thought, expression, and action. Third, justice based on mercy is the path to follow in order to achieve a dignified life of which every human being has a right. Fratelli Tutti says, true love for an oppressor means seeking ways to make him cease his oppression. Fourth, dialogue, understanding, and widespread promotion of a culture of tolerance, acceptance of others, and of living together peacefully would contribute significantly to reducing many economic, social, political, environmental problems that weigh so heavily on a large part of humanity. Fifth, dialogue among believers means coming together in the vast space of spiritual, human, and shared social values, and from there transmitting the highest moral virtue that religions aim for. Sixth, the protection of places of worship, synagogues, churches, and mosques. Seventh, terrorism is deplorable and threatens the security of people, but it is not due to religion, even when terrorists instrumentalize it. It is due rather to an accumulation of incorrect interpretation of religious texts and to policies linked to hunger, poverty, injustice, oppression, and pride. 8. The concept of citizenship is based on the equality of rights and duties under which all enjoy justice. 9th, good relations between East and West are indisputably necessary for both. 10th, it is an essential requirement to recognize the right of women to education and employment and to recognize their freedom to exercise their own political rights. Efforts must be made to modify those laws that prevent women from fully enjoying their rights. 9th, the protection of the fundamental rights of children. All those practices that violate the dignity and rights of children must be denounced. 12th, the protection of rights of the elderly, the weak, the disabled, and the oppressed. To facilitate and to expedite the healing process, the document requests that these principles be translated into policies, decisions, legislative texts, courses of study, and material to be circulated at all regional, international levels. Furthermore, it encourages schools, universities, and institutions of formation to use its principles as the object of research and reflection. Third point, fraternal dialogue. The mission of dialogue promotes fraternity. Prophetic dialogue and healing sow the seeds for a culture of fraternity. Fraternal dialogue reawakens us to acknowledge, appreciate, and love each other by transcending differences of origin, nationality, color, or religion. A fraternal person feels himself or herself a brother, sister to the sun, the sea, the wind, yet he or she feels even closer to those of his own flesh, especially the poor, the uncared for, and the outcast. Fratelli Tutti 2. Pope Francis in the encyclical Fratelli Tutti takes up and develops some of the great themes raised in the document on human fraternity with his own thoughts, Fratelli Tutti number 5, and presents them as a social encyclical to respond to present-day attempts to eliminate or ignore others. Even though it is written from a Christian conviction, the Pope extends an invitation to dialogue among all people of goodwill. Together with others, the Pope dreams to contribute to the rebirth of a universal aspiration to fraternity, Fratelli Tutti number 8, in place of tribalism. He appeals, I quote, "Let us dream then as a single human family, as fellow travelers sharing the same flesh, as children of the same earth, which is our common home, each of us bringing the richness of his or her beliefs and convictions, each of us with his or her own voice, brothers and sisters all." Let us briefly examine how religions can be at the service of fraternity in our world today. Fratelli Tutti notes that interreligious dialogue does not take place for the sake of diplomacy, consideration, or tolerance. Instead, I quote, "The goal of dialogue is to establish friendship, peace, and harmony, and to share spiritual, moral values and experiences in a spirit of truth and love." Number 271. Thus, the fraternal dialogue has double movements, vertical and horizontal. Vertical dialogue opens the believer to the transcendental truth, which in turn shapes his or her horizontal vision to recognize one another as traveling companions, truly brothers and sisters. Number 274. Thus, love of God and neighbor are interconnected. Fraternal dialogue mirrors the vertical dialogue, while I quote number 277, Fratelli Tutti, "Others drink from other sources. For us, the wellspring of human dignity and fraternity is in the gospel of Jesus Christ." In this context, interreligious dialogue becomes a dialogue of heart, to encounter with the sacred mystery of the other, to universal communion with the entire human family as a vocation of all, Fratelli Tutti 277. Moreover, this has nothing to do with watering down or concealing our deepest convictions, Fratelli Tutti 282. On the contrary, dialogue flows from our own identity. In the same way, the journey towards Christian unity also embraces, I quote, "the duty to offer common witness to the love of God for all people by working together in the service of humanity." Fratelli Tutti, while affirming religious freedom for believers of all religions, condemns the abuse of religion as a legitimizing instrument of political violence. It reminds us that the mission of religious leaders is to be true people of dialogue, to be an artisan of peace by uniting and not dividing, by extinguishing and not holding on to it, by opening paths of dialogue and not by constructing walls. 284. In Fratelli Tutti number 285, which refers to the document on human fraternity, Pope Francis reiterates the appeal for peace, justice, and fraternity, which we have already mentioned in Mission of Healing and Reconciliation. The Pope also names Christians St. Francis of Assisi, Blessed Charles de Foucault, Martin Luther King, Desmond Tutu, as well as followers of other religious traditions, Mahatma Gandhi, who have inspired his reflection on human fraternity. Conclusion. The Higher Committee of Human Fraternity has been established to share the message of the document on human fraternity. The United States General Assembly proclaimed 4th February as the International Day of Human Fraternity. Pope Francis himself acknowledges that the document on human fraternity and encyclical Fratelli Tutti have molded his vision and mission. I quote, "The Abu Dhabi one created a concern for fraternity in me. Fratelli Tutti came out, which has given a lot. Both documents must be studied because they go in the same direction. They are seeking fraternity." In-flight press conference from Baghdad. During the recent apostolic journey to Iraq, Pope Francis fostered the triple mission of prophecy, healing, and fraternity. I quote from his video message to the people of Iraq. "I come as a pilgrim, as a penitent pilgrim, to implore forgiveness and reconciliation from the Lord after years of war and terrorism, to ask God for the consolation of hearts and the healing of wounds. I come as a pilgrim of peace in search of fraternity, animated by the desire to pray together and to walk together also with brothers and sisters of other religious traditions." End quote. This journey, in spite of risk, clearly manifested the Pope's belief in the need to apply the principles of human fraternity. He is convinced that the antidote of division, hatred, and extremism is human fraternity, which embodies justice, healing, and reconciliation, unity, and mutual respect. Besides, the visit carried a powerful prophetic message to the whole world. Apparent clash of civilization can be overcome by culture of encounter. New tribalism, economic, political, cultural, ethnic, religious, etc. can be remedied by fraternity. Religion is not a part of the problem, but part of the solution. In launching the document on human fraternity in Abu Dhabi, Pope Francis already expressed these views. I quote, "There is no alternative. We will either build the future together or there will not be a future. Religions in particular cannot renounce the urgent task of building bridges between peoples and cultures. The time has come when religions should more actively exert themselves with courage and audacity and without pretense to help the human family deepen the capacity for reconciliation, the vision of hope, and the concrete path of peace." End quote. The Church is missionary by its very nature, Adventist number 2. It becomes missionary by attending to every context in which it finds itself. In other words, if Christianity is to be meaningful and relevant, it must address the issues affecting its life, church, and the lives of people and nature at all levels, national, regional, global. We are aware of the current context of the USA in particular and the world in general. Fratelli Tutti affirms that, I quote, "Religious classics can prove meaningful in every age," 275. And the Church has a mission to reawaken spiritual energy, Fratelli Tutti 278, of Christians and of others through dialogue to restore human fraternity. In the same way, the World Council of Churches will be reflecting how Christ's love moves the world to reconciliation and unity in 2022. It is also an attempt to respond to the challenges of our times, moved by Christ's love to foster reconciliation, unity in the world. Let me conclude my presentation with the words of Pope Francis. I quote, 2021 is a time that must not be wasted. And it will not be wasted if we can work together with generosity and commitment. In this regard, I am convinced that fraternity is the true cure for the pandemic and many evils that have affected us. Along with vaccines, fraternity and hope are, as it were, the medicine we need in today's world. In quotation, thank you very much for your patient listening.
Thank you, Monsignor. A lot to process. David, if you'd like to remind us all again about questions, people can ask questions.
So the best way to ask a question is to type it into the Q&A portion on Whova. After we get through those, which right now we only have one in Q&A in Whova, then we will move on to people who raise their hands in Zoom. So I'll let you know when we get to that point, and then I will bring you on screen to ask the question. So the question we have on Whova right now is, I believe it means, how is the situation in Sri Lanka with the Easter bombing of Catholic and Protestant churches? Monsignor?
Yeah. Yes. Good afternoon to everyone. The situation after 2 years of the sad event, unfortunately, as you may have also heard, the Cardinal Malcolm Ranjit, Archbishop of the Colombo Diocese, has been insisting on producing those who are responsible for the attack. The government appointed a commission, and the commission has submitted the report. And then again, the government appointed some parliamentarians to look into the documents and produce the president how to go about with the commission report. But unfortunately, nothing has happened so far when it comes to legal process. So people who lost their dear ones, people who were wounded, the wounds are still there, because still we do not know who were responsible, who whether this is an internal attack or whether this is international. So far we don't have any clear idea about it. So church is also, we had the Black Sunday as a protest, and then few days we will be celebrating the 2nd anniversary, and unfortunately no clear indication of those who were responsible for the attack. Yeah.
That's our only question in Whova right now. If you have another question and you're on Zoom, if you use the raise hand function, I'll try to scroll through people. We have a lot of people participating, so it's hard to look for actual raised hands, but I'll take a look.
Well, perhaps maybe I could generate some conversation while you're looking.
Go right ahead, please.
David. Thank you very much, Monsignor, for your presentation. You really spoke about the document on human fraternity and the encyclical Fratelli Tutti, combining both. And of course, Fratelli Tutti ends with those points from the document on the mutual commitments that have been made in that document between Pope Francis and Imam El-Tayyib of Al-Azhar. In my mind, the document on human fraternity works very well when you talk with Christians, Muslims, and Jews. It seems, since you're in Sri Lanka, that those, we almost need to kind of put the document up with Buddhists and see how they would like to respond and reframe the commitments, particularly because the document on human fraternity defines religion principally as worshiping the one God, committing to the one God. So do you, I do know that when Pope Francis went to Thailand and Japan towards the end of 2019, he raised this topic of human fraternity. Have you, in your work in the Pontifical Council, been able to reach out to Buddhist leaders and pursue this idea of how does the document resonate with them?
Yeah, thank you very much for raising this question. As a matter of fact, even though the document was signed by two religious leaders, Muslims, Islam and Catholicism, Christianity, document also clearly indicates that it's open for all, even for non-believers, people of goodwill. So it is a document for all. And then secondly, when Pope Francis visited Thailand, in fact, in his encounter with the Buddhist patriarch, he gave him a copy of the document, Human Fraternity. And also in his talks, he mentions about the importance of human fraternity. And when it comes to Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue, and when we write messages to Buddhists and even for other religions, we have touched this important topic. So in this way, when it comes to our work, the main concentration we can say is promoting these two documents, Human Fraternity and Fratelli Tutti.
All right, we've had a couple of questions come in through Huva. One said, what role might humbly recognizing, lamenting, apologizing for, and repenting be a part of our healing?
Could you please repeat the question?
Yes, what role might our humbly recognizing, lamenting, apologizing for, and repenting be a part of this healing?
Yeah, yes, healing process, asking pardon, asking forgiveness is part of the process. We saw it in South Africa. And also when we celebrated the Jubilee year, Pope John Paul II asked pardon for the forced use for evangelization. Forgiveness or asking pardon is an integral part for reconciliation because people are wounded and people need healing, and the healing process also involves the truth telling, And part of truth telling is acknowledging that we are also responsible, the people who are responsible for wounding. So it is an integral part of the reconciliation process.
Let's see, here's another one. Perhaps could you say more about the practical outcomes of Fratelli Tutti and the Human Fraternity document? Where do you see action, or rather putting this in practice?
Yeah, practical aspect, of course, we can see that the United Nations has declared a day, February 4th, as a day to celebrate the human fraternity. So in that way, an organization at the international level is promoting the importance of this day. And then, as we know, there is a commission also to put into practice the elements of this document. And then this commission within this short period has started many initiatives to promote the content of the document. And then when it comes to academic level, we can see whether it is in Rome, Pontifical universities, or at regional levels, different universities have taken the initiative to implement the content of this document, and also discuss on this document. So there are many initiatives, we can say, whether it is at the international level or at regional level or national level, to implement the content of the document. In that way, we can say that it is a document which has reached the many audience within a short period of time.
Another question in: how have Christians and other people of faith outside the USA perceived Pope Francis's recent tour through the Middle East?
Yeah, we live in a world where there is this global communication, and whether it is a visit to a particular country, Iraq, and it has a global impact because of the publicity also his visit got here. So it has an impact at a regional level and also at international level. And to answer to that question, we also need to analyze the speeches he made, the content of different speeches. So during this visit, Pope met Christians, Pope met Catholics, Pope met the diplomatic corps, or we can say political leaders, and also followers of other religions. So he met three groups, and where we can say also, when we analyze his discourses, there is an invitation for Christians, the importance of a mission of reconciliation. And also there is a prophetic voice where he condemns violence and promotes fraternity. And also interreligious meeting, he underlines the importance of dialogue as a means for healing. So internationally, this visit attracted much publicity, and also because of the global communication, it also influenced influenced the region and also the international community, and communicated a powerful message that religion is not a problem, but a solution. And also it communicated a powerful message that through dialogue, through fraternity, that we can find solution to national problem or regional problem or global problem. Up to before Pope's visit, there was much talk about clash of civilization, hostilities between Islam and Christianity. And with that visit, it created a completely a new vision and communicated to the whole world that we can meet, we can discuss, and through dialogue, we can iron out our differences, we can seek healing, and we can reconstruct a destroyed society. We can start the rehabilitation process, and we can build bridges. So in that way, it is a visit to a particular country with particular wounds, but it also has a powerful message to the region and also to the international community, because today we see the tribalism in different types are present in different contexts.
John, do you want to jump in here at any point?
Yes, if I may. I want to suggest, and I would imagine Monsignor would agree with me, Fratelli Tutti is the interreligious encyclical. Now, I say this particularly to the group here at the Workshop for Christian Unity, because when Ut Unum Sint came out in 1995, it became something that was studied by the workshop 30 years after the close of Vatican II. Now, it was quite significant, but we really haven't had an encyclical that's addressed within the framework of interreligious dialogue and within the framework of religious pluralism, a particular message. So it functions differently, Fratelli Tutti does, than Ut Unum Sint, which in a way represented Pope John Paul II's analysis of the accomplishments thus far and the agenda ahead. And then he gave an invitation to the churches to reflect with him on the ministry of unity, serving the unity of the church. Fratelli Tutti does this differently. It takes the present crisis, our COVID world, and is looking towards the post-COVID world, but he redefines interreligious dialogue. It's no longer let's not reflect on a theology of religions. Let's get into a interreligious friendship and accompaniment. And this is an approach that I know the Pontifical Council embraced with the papacy of Pope Francis. But now we have an encyclical that says, first of all, mutual cooperation among the religions, and then we strive for, as a standard, reciprocal understanding as we're cooperating, and then we build human solidarity. And the invitation he offers at the end of this encyclical is the invitation that he and Imam El-Tayyib offered in the document on human fraternity. But if you look at it, it begins with Francis of Assisi on the Fifth Crusade meeting the Sultan, and it concludes with a reference to Francis, and then to others, that the others who Monsignor mentioned, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and Charles de Foucault, as well as Francis of Assisi. So we, and there's a whole chapter that uses dialogue several times as an encounter, that let's adopt a culture of encounter. let's cooperate for the good of the world, for the good of humanity. Then reciprocal understanding will arise as we work along, respecting one another's identity, respecting the fact of de facto religious pluralism, and will build human solidarity. And it's quite significant. And that one paragraph that Monsignor quoted, 271, where he uses, this is important to us as ecumenists, he quotes at length a long passage from an ecumenical service in Riga, Latvia in 2018, the year after we concluded the centenary of Martin Luther's Reformation. He goes to the Baltics, and in ecumenical service, he uses this beautiful imagery of we Christians are very much aware that if the music of the gospel ceases to resonate in our very being, we will lose the joy born of compassion, the tender love born of trust. And he goes on with this beautiful metaphor of the music of the gospel. And then in the next paragraph, he shifts. So he says something to all Christians, an ecumenical statement. And then he shifts, others drink from other sources, meaning other religions draw from their sources as we draw from the gospel. So it's a beautiful, beautiful text and he talks of the parallel with his relationship with Patriarch Bartholomew in the writing of Laudato Si, and then his relationship with Imam al-Taib in the writing of the Human Fraternity text and this text. Then he goes into the social encyclical that Monsignor talks about, the social message, chapter 6 on dialogue and encounter, redefining it in many ways, and his conclusion. So I think it's rather significant to think of this as the interreligious encyclical, very much matching how Unum Sent functioned for us as ecumenists some years ago.
Okay, we have another question in. It seems that religious literacy is an important part of promoting fraternity. How can we promote greater religious literacy in our own denominations and throughout the world?
Yeah, because as we know, thank you very much also for the observations made by Dr. Borelli, and I fully agree with him. We live in a different, difficult context. I often say that different types of tribalism are emerging. It can be economic tribalism, it can be racism, it can be ethnic tribalism, it can be religious tribalism. And these tribalisms are real challenges to human fraternity. And then Francis of Assisi also lived in a time of conflicts, different types of tribalism, and then he was able to swim against the current. And then we have Pope Francis also lived in a particular context, and then he also from the beginning speaks of Third World War in pieces, and the church has to be sort of a field hospital. And then he speaks of importance of tenderness and the dialogue of mercy, because it is a wounded world, and in a wounded world we need to heal the wounds of the people. So when it comes to interreligious dialogue, we can say dialogue has dialogue of life, dialogue of action, and dialogue of theological dialogue and spiritual dialogue. So we can say here Pope Francis gives much emphasis to a dialogue of action. And here action includes ecumenical and interreligious dialogue. So it is a difficult time. Different tribalisms are emerging, and also we need to account for this emergence of nationalism, fundamentalism, extremism, sectarianism, etc., because there are socio-economic, political causes for them. And then one other issue is importance of education or overcoming the ignorance. And because where there is ignorance, there is prejudice. Where there is prejudice, we don't see the reality. And then when we do not see the reality, we act in a different way. So to face this, this is a serious issue, and Pope Francis also has realized this, and through the Congregation for Education, Catholic Education, is also trying to promote the importance of interreligious education. So Francis of Assisi went to, there was an encounter that is sort of a lived experience overcoming the ignorance, because during his time there was a lot of ignorance, and ignorance was used or we can say manipulated by people to promote crusaders war. And this is also happening today, not only in different religions, it's also within Christianity. So promoting interreligious, literacy on interreligious dialogue, even for among the children, especially, and also for adults, it's important so that we know, we have the assurance that with this knowledge, they can face the future without any problems or any prejudices.
If I might add too, I think given the de facto religious pluralism that Pope Francis acknowledges in Fratelli Tutti and previously, he's really saying that, as we know as ecumenists, one of the best ways to understand our tradition is in dialogue and friendship with those of other traditions. We know this ecumenically. We learn more about other churches as we are in dialogue with our ecumenical friends and grow in our respect and appreciation of one another and our mutual understanding. Interreligious friendship is one of the best ways to increase literacy in your own tradition. And I think this is interreligious education this way works, but it also has to be embraced personally. And I think this notion of accompaniment and friendship is a way of learning more about what we really hold dear as we listen to what others hold dear.
All right, we have another question coming in from Huva. This is from Catherine Laurie. She says she appreciates what John is saying. She wonders if this paradigm shift means that in this paradigm shift, is the discussion of the theology of religion set aside altogether, or does it simply have a different priority? In our work as ELCA Lutherans, we have intentionally set it aside, at least for the time being, in order to focus on the accompaniment and engagement, but it keeps coming back around the edges.
Sure, it keeps coming back around the edges, because when you have a phrase, others drink from other sources, you're already raising a question of a theology of religions. But it's muting the questions of questions that we've not been able to answer after decades of an approach of a theology of religions. And in a sense, setting aside, but reflecting, it may be that we learn more about this theology of religions through our friendship with people in those traditions. I think this happened in especially, an example is our relationship as Christians with Jews. When we set aside the way we had theologized who Jews were for millennia and began the actual dialogue itself, the scholarship began to increase significantly. And we began to understand how very gradual the separation was between Christians and Jews in the early centuries. And we came to understand more and more about Paul as a Jew rather than as a Christian, speaking as a Jew and writing as a Jew who believed in the Messiah. And so, and now we have Jewish scholars of the New Testament, which has brought a whole new dimension. So I think in a way, we will always have a kind of theology of religions with us. And I do know when Pope Francis, I've had others challenge me, but what does he mean by others drank from other sources? There were those who worried when Nostra Aetate was passed, when it first appeared as a full-blown text on relationship of Christians to other religions. The question was, well, is Christianity just another religion? Well, Pope Francis is not saying that. He said, and he has said this, it's in the Fratelli Tutti, and to some extent it's in the document on human fraternity, but it preceded that by a year when he was by 2 years, when he was in Egypt at Al-Azhar University and spoke. He talked about we should be confirmed in our identity, and we should be respectful that others should be able to speak from their identity. So that's his approach. And so I think, yes, in this paradigm shift, we're going to, I think, return eventually to a theology of religions, but in a very different, maybe by a different model than what's been pursued up to this point, by questions that ultimately cannot be answered simply because two religious traditions have understandings and concepts that don't translate well into one another. So.
Yeah, in Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis in number 277, he says, interreligious dialogue becomes a dialogue of the heart. I quote, to encounter with the sacred mystery of the other, to universal communion with the entire human family as a vocation of all. Then he adds in 282, this has nothing to do with watering down or concealing our deepest convictions. On one hand, he opens to the mystery of God, and then God, who has been speaking to humanity from the beginning in different ways, and who has spoken through Jesus Christ. And also he says there is no watering down of our convictions. And he also says further, on the contrary, dialogue flows from our own identity. As Dr. Borelli said, he has already also spoken about this. And then he says further, in the same way, the journey towards Christian unity also embraces the duty to offer common witness to the love of God for all people by working together in the service of humanity. 280. So what I want to emphasize is I am reminded of a parable that is narrated by the Buddha, we can say also. And then he says one of his disciples comes up with all ultimate questions, whether there is God, soul, what would happen after life, all these existential questions. Then Buddha says, if you go through a forest and somebody shoot at you with a poisonous arrow, and if you say, I will not remove this poisonous arrow until I see the person who shot at me, his caste, creed, etc., etc. And then the Buddha says he would die of the poison. So he says, my answer is to find a solution to the suffering of humanity. And then here also what I see in Pope's approach is dialogue of action, and he wants all religions to promote fraternity and work towards a betterment of the world in the society, because there are many conflicts, many tensions in our society. And it doesn't mean that theological or theology of religion is not important, but that reflection also is important. But here we have at the grassroots level, people are suffering, people are wounded, and we need to attend to their wounds. And then that urgency pushes also Pope Francis to have an approach of dialogue of compassion. He promotes a culture of compassion, culture of mercy, a culture of tenderness, because there are people who are suffering, who are wounded, who are bleeding.
Let me just add that this dialogue of the heart, from the heart, has that compassionate, merciful aspect, and it also has the aspect of our deepest convictions. And in a way, the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue anticipated that point in its 1991 text, Dialogue and Proclamation, where I believe it's paragraph 40 that says, interreligious dialogue reaches its deepest level, that of the spirit, where we share our deepest beliefs and longings with one another. It's a beautiful passage that can often be passed on, but I think that's resonating here in Pope Francis' views, as well as the whole aspect of compassion towards one another.
We have about 5 minutes left, so I think at this point it'd be a good point to do any summing up or closing statements that you'd like to make, Monsignor or John.
Okay, sure. I really enjoyed this opportunity, and teasing out from Monsignor Koditawatku his understanding of Fratelli Tutti as he sees it, and especially as he sees it being applied in Asia, in Sri Lanka, where he is now, his homeland, and also its multivalency for the time that we're living in. I want to explore further how Fratelli Tutti can serve as an interreligious encyclical, and one that's that can be a resource to all Christians, and that interreligious relations should not at all be a threat to ecumenical relations. They're not in competition. In fact, the Pontifical Council for Christian Unity, which preceded Monsignor's Pontifical Council by a few years and carried Nostra Aetate through Vatican II, came out recently with a text, a Vade Mecum, a summary of ecumenical teachings for bishops. And it's a great resource. And in it, it talks about interreligious dialogue as a form of the dialogue of life, and it gives it a whole section. So I think that was a wonderful nod from the Ecumenical Office towards, we're not in competition, we should be working with one another.
Yeah, in the document Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis says, fraternal dialogue reawakens us to acknowledge, appreciate, and love each person by transcending differences of origin, nationality, color, or religion. Number one. Number three, I'm in Sri Lanka. I know the history of my country. I know the how much blood we have shed, youth uprising, 1971, 1989, and then ethnic problem, and then other tensions prevailing at the moment. and also tensions among Christians because of conversion issue. And also with that experience, I can see the whole Asia, most of the countries are going through a difficult situation today. And also in your own context, your country, we know that the latest developments. So here we are distancing from seeing the other as a brother and a sister. And then we are emerging instead sort of a tribalism, a small group mentality, promoting one's own group at the expense of others. This is a serious issue today. And then for this context, this document is very prophetic, because as Francis of Assisi tried to swim against the current, Pope Francis is trying to swim against the current. And then he also says clearly that we have so-called axial religions. He says that religion can be reawakened, because in the past, religion responded to these issues. These problems are not new to us. Throughout the human history, we have faced the socioeconomic solution, and religions with its spirituality were able to offer as solutions, elevating human minds to a different level, liberating human person from tribalism, and bringing him to a different level to see the other as a brother and sister. So it is our duty as followers of different religions, and also as Christians, we celebrate also Easter. The message of Easter is peace be with you. As the Father sent, I send you. And Jesus sends his disciples as peacemakers, and also to heal the wounds. And he shows his own wounds, and that's the price that one has to pay for the mission of healing. And so Easter message is very much alive, and Christianity has a deeper meaning today. And together with others, we need to enter into the mystery of God, who is the Father or Mother of all, and then elevate the human mind to a different level, liberating the person from all tribalisms. And it is our mission today.
All right, so we've come to the end of our time. Thank you, Monsignor. Thank you, Dr.
Thank
Borelli,
you.
for
Thank
being
you.
with us today. A very rich reflection, I think, for all of us, how we're not here called to just unity for itself, but that the world might come to belief, and all of the suffering and all of the extremism that we've been experiencing is showing that those numbers of believers are dropping, and the only way that we can, I think, find a solution is together. It's so clear. We have to come together. So that's what this purpose is for. Thank you for being with us.
Enjoyed it
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.